Hi there. I thought I'd just do this video on my iPhone while I'm waiting for Mummy. Um, it's Sunday afternoon, and I'm just picking Mummy up from the NHS hospital. With regards to thinking back on the past, I've been doing quite a lot of work recently, so I haven't been able to do any of my leisure videos that I was doing earlier at the beginning of the year and late last year. So I thought I would talk a little bit about some of the things I remember in the past. Some of those things I'm thinking about during my school years of 1970, for example, as a year. That was a year I remember well because it was a year, I think it was when I was doing my GCE O-levels at Lindisfarne College. I know the summer it was in the summertime with Mungo Jerry at number one. Newcomb, he won Wimbledon, the tennis, if I'm not mistaken. The FA Cup, it was between Chelsea and Leeds in the final. And the FA Cup, that was another one. The FA Cup took place earlier that year because it was also the year of the World Cup. I remember that at Lindisfarne as well. But the FA Cup, was it won by Chelsea or was it won by Leeds? I think it was won by Chelsea against Leeds. But I know it was the first time Chelsea had won the FA Cup. Like I said, that was also the World Cup. And England were still not favourites. They were sort of second favourites to Brazil at the time. They were the world champions. They'd won the 1966 World Cup, and so they were going to Mexico to defend their title as the world champions, believe it or not. And I can remember watching that. We had the TV. I remember the game when they were knocked out by Germany. I mean, they lost one in the qualifying rounds. Brazil was in their group. There weren't as many groups as they have today, but Brazil was in their group, and they did lose to Brazil. But Pelé was playing in those days, and Pelé, I know Gordon Banks, the England goalkeeper, he was applauded for making an exceptional save that Pelé shot, and he saved it. And it got into the headlines, and even Pelé stopped and clapped him. It was one of those sort of moments. But although we were beaten by Brazil, we still qualified for going through to the last eight. And I can't remember if it was the quarterfinals or the semi-finals that we met West Germany, and it was West Germany who then beat us. It was, what was it? It was 3-2. Was it 3-2 in extra time? I know. It was a very close game, and we could have, we were up at, I think we were 2-0 in the lead at one stage, and then Germany scored in the sort of the final minutes of normal time, and it was one of those sort of games. So, yeah, I can remember that well. And we also, what else? That particular day or evening, it was what was it? No, where would it have been? If it was Mexico, yeah, it would have been evening time at Lindisfarne College. Picture the time, and we had the television. It was in the library. It was sitting right. It was the television, that metal stand with the black and white TV on the top of it. It was in the library where Mr. Campion's desk was. So all the chairs had been pulled out from around the tables, and they were all in the centre, and everyone was sitting there watching that particular match. And it was it was a good times, but it wasn't a great result. I remember Ambrose Hamilton, who'd only joined in the summer term that particular year. He was very disappointed with the fact England had lost. Yeah, we all thought England were going to win in those days, obviously, and not like we think today. I also remember thinking back to that television with that metal steel stand. It used to be in the Great Hall in the corner. We used to watch TV in the corner of the Great Hall. I remember on Saturday afternoons we'd watch sometimes it was then the Five Nations rugby. I can't remember who won the Five Nations in 1970, quite honestly. No, more than likely Wales, because Wales in those days, they had a fantastic team with Barry John and John Williams and so on. I can remember a lot of the players. Our players, I'm trying to think. England had people like David Duckham and Spencer, people like that. So I can recall some of the names of the players. Our Prime Minister at the time, well, in 1970, it would have been, that was an election year. We had Harold Wilson lost to Ted Heath, who became Prime Minister. Yep, that's how that one went. He was the Prime Minister. He was a Tory. He was a Conservative. He was, what did they call him? He wasn't a great Prime Minister, to be honest. Although he was handling the country in difficult times. He was what they described him as a confirmed bachelor, Ted Heath. He liked playing his organ, and he had a boat down in Portsmouth. He used to like sailing as well. So that was his. Whereas Harold Wilson, who was his counterpart on the Labour Party, who'd been Prime Minister for quite a few years, and had won 2 elections actually prior. He was, he used to enjoy his holidays in the Scilly Isles. That's where he was. Now, who was the American president at this time? Gosh, now that's an interesting one. Was it Nixon at that stage, or are we going back before him? Jeepers creepers. I know it was a time when the Vietnam War was at its heights. I mean, Vietnam had been going along for a long time. I mean, I think Vietnam finished when? About 74? When Saigon fell? But 1970, there was a lot going on in Vietnam. There were a lot of troops in Vietnam, but the war was slipping away. It was edging now out the other way. Was it Eisenhower as the president? I can't remember. Who was president then? Guys, you'll have to help me on this one. I can't remember exactly. I mean, I can look it up, I know, but I can't look it up here in the car at the moment. Oh, yeah, I remember that. Anyway, Vietnam. Yeah, that was a disaster, really, when I think about it. I mean, I can recall, well, Vietnam, as far as things were going then, it was all about ensuring communism didn't get into Asia and Southeast Asia, and that's what the American position was then. They were determined not to let communism into that part of the world, and it was the French had left Vietnam in this vacuum, and the Americans felt they had to go in and ensure that it didn't become a communist country. And it was their position in the sand. They had already been in a position with Korea, and Vietnam was sort of, they thought as being a short war, whereas in fact it was a lengthy war, and they lost more troops in that war than any other war. In fact, all wars put together, I think there was, and the amount of money that went into supporting a war in Vietnam was colossal at that particular point in time. I can recall that as well. And I know, in those days, I mean, the people that we had at the school, people like Tom King, who was there for a period. I remember him telling me that he was, he was eligible to go to Vietnam. I mean, obviously, I don't know if he went, because he was still at the school then. But I know his number came up that year he was leaving, and I don't know if actually he went to Vietnam. I do know he was successfully running a business later in life, because Willie MacArthur told me that. But I can't recall in terms of if he actually went to Vietnam. But I know the stories about Vietnam were horrific. What else in 1970? I mentioned the tennis, didn't I? It was Newcombe won the tennis, who was the sort of the star. I don't know if you remember Newcombe. He was an Australian tennis player. I think he beat Sam Smith, if I'm not mistaken, the American. Was it Sam Smith? Yeah, I think it was. But I know Newcombe was the winner of Wimbledon in 1970, and I think it was his third or fourth Wimbledon title. It was probably one of his last titles, because I think soon after that he would have been retiring, I'm sure. He's the guy that had the big droopy moustache. Yeah, there was a lot of things going on in the 1970s. It was a good year in many respects. Yeah, that's all I can think of now, guys. Talk to you again soon.